John Pope. And he does, and he brought us some paintings, Beanie Elam paintings that he made at White Oak. We'll go more into that in a little bit too. But back to the rest of the guys that went on that trip back in 1925. There was John Gill Kleiner, a farmer, and he was the last survivor of the original group to go to White Oak Creek in 1925. So, how did this come about? Well, from what we've been able to piece together from the research that we've done, Dr. Dye was a mover and shaker, and he loved to fish. And he found several fellas, these guys here that I've just got to be mentioning. And so he talked them into going on a fishing trip to White Oak Creek in Houston County. Now you have to remember, this is 1925. The roads are not very good between Springfield and Clarksville, or especially Houston County. Houston County was practically a wilderness. Now, Springfield was a backwater, but they were a wilderness. But anyway, and why did they choose Houston County? Now they could have gone to Cars Creek, they could have gone to Silver Fork Creek here in Springfield, they could have gone to Red River, and probably all of them did go fishing there. But near as we can tell, possibly Jack Jones, who was the tobacco man, knew some people down in Houston County and found out that White Oak Creek is one of the prettiest spring-fed creeks in all of Tennessee. And it's also, it almost would qualify as a river. It's just not quite big enough or long enough. But spring-fed, and they had heard that White Oak Creek had some of the best game fish, smallmouth, largemouth, black perch being the equivalent of filet mignon to fishing. And anyway, so he put together a fishing trip. They got together, we think on a Saturday morning, right here in Springfield, at the old Springfield Depot. Took the train to Houston County, to Nashville, changed trains there, and then went to Stewart, Tennessee. Stewart's a little small, wide spot in the road even today. But evidently it was a train stop. From there, Jack Jones had managed to secure the services of a man who owned a mule team and wagon, and he hauled them several more miles with all their fishing gear and enough food to last them to Molly Brown's campground. Now, Molly Brown's campground was a dog trot cabin. Now, some of you senior members may know what a dog trot is, but most young people do not know. It's a cabin that has an opening from the beginning all the way to the end. The reason they call it a dog trot cabin is because the dogs will trot through, and that's where they will stay. But anyway, so that's where they stayed. They stayed in Molly Brown's dog trot cabin. And the only accoutrements they had was an outhouse and a wood-burning stove. And so they stayed there for a week, had a good time, enjoyed themselves. Now, you know, I said, why in the world did they go all the way to Houston County? Because that was a long trip, even in those days, especially by train. Near as we can figure, the reason they went down there and bypassed going to Cars Creek, Sulphur Fork, and Red River was to get away from their wives. And their preachers. That's not to say that these guys were wild or anything like that. They were all pillars of the community, even then, and they would go on to be pillars of their community. But near as we can figure, that's one of the reasons they went down there. Another reason was we have been told, even us members that are in the modern era of the White Oak Fishing Club, that you can get pretty good moonshine in those parts. In fact, I've actually purchased some moonshine in Houston County since I've been going down, and it was pretty good. So those guys, they had a good time. They stayed all week, and then they decided, probably hanging around a campfire, that they would come back the next year, and they did. But before they made that vow to come back, they also came up with an oath. The oath was, what happens at White Oak stays at White Oak. Those guys kept that secret for years and years and years. There were no photos of White Oak Creek. In fact, it wasn't until the modern era, until people like myself got involved in it, where we started making a lot of photos, as you can see. Now, these photos here are of two camps. Molly Brown's campground, the White Oak bunch that went down there in 1925, they and their descendants stayed at Molly Brown's campground all the way up until 2001. Now, Molly Brown's cabin, and that's where they would go. They would go down there and stay in Molly Brown's cabin. And it wasn't the big crowd that we have these days. They were much smaller, probably 10, 15, 20 at the most. And they usually would stay all in the cabin. And they all had particular places where they would stay in the cabin. They had their own little niche, stuff like that. And anyway, that's what they would do. They'd stay in the Molly Brown's campground. Oftentimes, too, in those early days, they would bring a cook with them. And oftentimes, it would be an African-American cook who would go down there and cook for them for the week. And they would go and have a good time. Also, Bobby Jones told me a story. Many of you seniors remember Bobby Jones. And Bobby was a very active member of the White Oak Fishing Club up until he passed away a few years ago. He was also a nephew of Jack Jones, one of the originals. In fact, Bobby's dad, Maxie, and his brother Pete were big members of the White Oak Fishing Club, what I call the middle years. And anyway, so but Bobby told a story about when they started going down there in the early days, that there was a hermit who lived in a cave nearby, and when the White Oak Fishing Club would show up down there, he would come around. And Dr. Dye, being a physician, also a humanitarian, made friends with this fellow. And they got to be pretty good pals. And Dr. Dye, realizing that he probably had some mental problems, and we surmised that perhaps maybe this fellow, this hermit, who lived in a cave, that's where he lived, that's where he stayed for years and years, perhaps was a World War veteran who might have been suffering from post-traumatic self-disorder, whatever, anyway, PTSD. And anyway, but they made friends, and Dr. Dye would take him a gift every year, maybe a new pair of shoes, maybe some overalls, maybe something for him to use to kind of get by with, which I thought that was kind of neat, kind of interesting story that happened. But anyway, that's one of the cases that they had down there. Then we go on up to the middle years, which is what I call 1948 to about 1974. The reason I say 1974, because in those years, 1925 on to 1974, they stayed in Molly Brown's cabin, the old dog trot cabin. And there are paintings over there that Beanie Elam, y'all know Beanie Elam, many of you, some of you have got paintings that he's painted for you, or you collected, or managed to get a hold of, like myself. And anyway, Beanie, from what we understand, he was, I know this, he was a prolific artist. He was also a poet, raconteur. He was also very big in the Boy Scouts. In fact, he gained the nickname Mr. Boy Scout of Tennessee. But Beanie would go down there, and he would go fishing, and he loved to fish. But from what I understand from some of the older members that I've heard from and talked about, that he wasn't much of a fisherman. He just liked to go and hang out with the guys, and then he would paint paintings and do sketches and stuff like that. So a lot of that artwork that you see back there in that memorabilia table was by Beanie Elam. He got some really neat paintings. One of my favorites, y'all bear with me. And this is the one that Richard published. You took what you wanted to eat with you. Of course, they caught fish in the stream because it was prolific with fish. It still is. That's why even the White Oak Fishing Club 100 years later still goes fishing down there every year. And while I'm thinking about it too, members of the White Oak Fishing Club, would y'all please stand up and introduce yourself? Because some of you go back generations. Tommy?
Tommy Lyon.
Tony Cooksey.
And Jeff Baker.
Anybody else?
Like Dave, been going since '84.
And they all pretty much got me beat. I've been going since 2001. Anyway, talking about Beanie, he came up with what they would refer to as tea time at White Oak. Now, tea time would be, they would all gather at the spring. There's a little spring that went through the old campsite, full of fresh water, spring water, and that's where they would have a drink at the end of the day. And in fact, the story goes from those days that they would bring down a bottle of Jack Daniels and put it on a rock. And when you brought your fish in to put them into the fish basket, then if you had a good day, then you could take a little nib, or if you wanted to mix it with the spring water, you could do that too, because the water was as fresh as it could be. Now, we've got some pictures from this year's camp where a group of us went back to old camp. The old camp had grown up. In fact, it looked more like a jungle than it did anything like it did back in those early days when those guys went down. That, to me, is probably one of the most interesting things about Beanie, is that he came up with what would be referred to as tea time, and then he would also name some of the fishing holes that they would use, and all that. I've got a journal. In fact, we have it on file here at the museum, where Beanie includes his artwork, also includes his poetry, and we've got a book of that over there on the memorabilia table. But Beanie had a good time, and everybody enjoyed having him down there, but you can see he was busy painting. He wasn't busy fishing, it didn't look like. Richard also told us a story about one time he was in White Oak Creek with his grandfather, who was John Pope, one of the originals, and they were fishing, and one day they heard a jet plane come flying over, and it swooped down over White Oak Creek, and then went back up into the sky. And Richard, I think, asked his grandfather, who was that? And I believe John referred to it, said, actually gave him an answer and said, oh, don't pay any attention, that's Carney Bell. Now, Carney Bell was Bob Bell's, who was another one of the originals who came down there in 1925. And I told that to Bob Bell, the grandson, and he said, oh yeah, Carney did that all the time. In fact, when we knew he was going to be flying over the house, we had to turn all the house lights on so he could see the house. But Carney was an active member. Some of the other active members was Gene Beck Sr., Bascom Cook, Suzanne Glover's dad, John Pope again. So there was, these guys, again, were pillars of the community, but yet they still like to go to White Oak and get together and have a good time. Like I said, I got involved in the club in 2001. First year, I never forget it. I'd been invited by Tommy Lyons, who's over there. I was active in the Boy Scouts at the time, as an adult leader. Tommy was, of course, he was running camporee for the Boy Scouts, for the Warioto district. And he told me, he says, you ought to come to White Oak. And I said, what's White Oak? He said, oh yeah, you know, it's a fishing camp. I said, fishing camp? I don't fish. And he said, oh, well, yeah, but you know everybody that comes down there. And I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a shot, I guess. Because he made it sound kind of interesting, and sure enough, I did know some of the members. One of them was Clyde Dean, who's one of my friends. There we are. Okay. Well, what you're seeing here, folks, and this is probably kind of interesting. Yeah, kind of interesting. They had a womanless beauty contest back in 2000. That's Grady Elder. Some of y'all remember Grady. He lived here in Springfield. He was a very active member.
He won the contest.
He won the contest. Clyde, would you like to say anything about
Well, I'll
that?
tell you this about it right now. Bird's not here, but I said, I'll dress up as a woman for Cookson. And I did everything he could, but he did. To judge this contest, Jack went over the main road and stopped the car and said, get out and judge and tell us who's going to win the contest. But it's not a stranger. This group of family got out, man, woman, maybe two men.
Womanless beauty contest back in 2000. And those photos, that's probably one of the reasons they said what happens in White Oak stays in White Oak. But you can see how beautiful, from these photos, you can see how beautiful the water is, how beautiful the woods are there. And also, I think one of the most important things is about the White Oak Fishing Club when they started out in 1925. Yeah, it was a group of guys going down there by themselves and having a good time, fellowship, friendship, etc. Maybe having a nip every once in a while, playing some cards perhaps. But one thing about it, as they got older, they started bringing their sons. And then as they got even older, they started bringing their grandsons, like Richard Pope. He can remember coming down there when he was a Colton Cooksey right here. Colton, how long have you been coming to White Oak?
20 years, I guess.
20 years. And how old are you now?
28.
28. So what do you think about it? All right. Later on in these photos, I'll show you some photos of my grandsons who came to White Oak this year for the first time, Nathan and Luke, and how much fun they had, and how much fun I had having them down there. But it's a great thing, I think, that we do. You won't find another club. When I say we're one of the oldest in the country, I haven't been able to find another fishing club that's as old as the White Oak Fishing. And we've been going for 100 years. We never missed a year. Even during World War II, they still win. You can see again. Now, is that Billy Goat Bluff? I think so, it is. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, and one of the cool things about White Oak, at least at the new camp, and at the old camp too, ladies, I'm sorry, we do not have running water at White Oak. So you have to use an outhouse. In fact, some said, well, why don't we try and dig a well, and that way we can have, we can have flush toilets, and wouldn't that be nice? And then some of us said, well, if we do that, then the women will start coming. Is that not right, Nelda?
I love White Oak. We're just like a secret camp.
Yeah, in fact, one of the sayings too about White Oak, when the fellas get ready to go to White Oak, one of the sayings that goes around, somebody will say, well, what did your wife say about you coming to camp? Well, she asked me, when's camp? And I told her. She says, well, when you leaving? Well, I'm leaving on Sunday. And when you coming back? Well, maybe on Sunday. And then she says, well, why are you coming back so quick? So that's part of it. It's, I think the most important thing that we do is we are enjoying ourselves, but we're also enjoying the great outdoors. And Houston County, and you can see from some of these, that's a dog trot cabin right there with Tommy Lyons and his crew. When we bought the property, this in 2001 was the last year of old camp. That was the last year we were at Molly Brown's campground. And like I started to say, when I went down there in 2001, I thought, this is not really camping. This is like being on a hot LZ in Vietnam. At least that's what I would have thought it was, because it was more like a jungle. And what they did when the campground in those days, they would know when we were coming to camp. And they would go out with a tractor and a bush hog and mow down all the little saplings all the big bushes and stuff like that.